So there's a little bit of a backstory here, I think, before we'll talk about this in 10 sentences. After World War II, sports car racing in America and in the world became, much more doable. The economy, the world economy was picking up. Sports cars were interesting to a lot of people. And there were a lot of patrons of the sports car world. Johnny Von Neumann on the West Coast, John Edgar, Tony Paravano, Jim Kimberly, who got mentioned earlier, and Alan Giberson, who actually bought this car new from Canetti. Those guys actually propped up, supported sports car racing at this level in the mid-50s. And the story with this particular car, I mentioned Alan Giberson. It was such a primitive time that Carol Shelby, who lived in Texas, drove from Dallas to New York, collected the car, drove this car to Sebring, met with Phil Hill. Carol Shelby, Phil Hill took the checker flag in this car in 1955 and actually lost on recount. The Cunningham D-Type actually won the race by 12 seconds or whatever it was. After the race, Phil Hill himself trailered this car back to Southern California, took it to his buddy Bob Sorrell. It got a quick down and dirty white paint job, and literally 3 weeks later, Phil and Bob Sorrell trailered the car up to Northern California to Pebble Beach. Race in this car a month later. Then literally towards the end of 1955, Alan Giberson advertised this car, and a young Jim Hall was interested in buying a 550 Porsche, and his brother, who actually had the purse strings of the family, they went over to Giberson's place to look at this Porsche, and they weren't really interested in the Porsche after they saw this. And then bought this car, and then actually the Hall brothers sent Carol Shelby back to California. Carol won the Pebble Beach Del Monte Trophy in this car in 1956, a year later, and then trailered the car himself from Pebble Beach back to Dodge City, Kansas. Carol won the SCCA races in Dodge City, Kansas in this car. And then when Jim got out of school, Jim Hall, he actually, his first win in a racing car was in this car. And Jim raced the car throughout the South. Jim Hall, Carol Shelby, ran the car in Texas, Louisiana, New Mexico, Oklahoma. And then it had a clutch failure in March of '58, and they put it away. And it never ran after 1958. And it sat until we bought the car from him in 2016. So it's got kind of an interesting history in that way. Spectacular car, very original, very correct. It had its nose bumped a couple of times, and it's a racing car, and it has seen some service. We're going to use the car this coming weekend at the last CSRG event, Thunder Hill, and this young man here is going to drive it. So I should let him talk about sort of the car, because he's been driving it. And
My name's Tazio. We restored this car together. It was kind of an adventure. We did a lot of photographic, research, essentially. A lot of the photos we could find from Pebble Beach and where it ran in various races throughout the day. To get the car accurate enough to be able to do well at Pebble Beach. So that was a really fun adventure. We do a car or two for Pebble Beach each year. This was a little different because we wanted to race this car. So getting the car really ready to go race was, that extra step that, we do with the motor stuff, but getting the complete car ready was, an added step. We ended up taking the motor back apart 3 weeks before Pebble Beach, and we also raced the car that same weekend at the Historics. So we kind of did double duty, going back and forth from the track and Pebble. And it was definitely a feat to accomplish that. But the car is amazing to drive. I've really enjoyed it thus far. I think these cars were really starting to become real race cars in this time period. Not to say that a 166 that could win Le Mans and all that wasn't a real race car, but I think the technology of this era really started to develop into something that you could really drive hard. I've had the opportunity to drive in IMSA the past couple seasons, and before that I did a lot of open wheel stuff. And you can kind of treat the car, granted it doesn't have the same amount of traction level, and it doesn't have a light up dash in front of you and paddle shifters, but you can kind of treat the car in a similar manner. You can really stomp the brakes, you can get the thing to shut down, you can get the thing to self-steer and rotate like a proper race car should. And it's so predictable and so confidence-inspiring to drive hard. It's a really fantastic car to be able to share the steering wheel. So.
Over an 120 if you run out of brakes.
So everybody tells me that the drum brakes aren't that great, and again, everybody did go disc brakes several years later. I never really had any difficulty with it. In a prototype car, we'll look at data and exactly what the brake looks like, and the initial hit, you slam the thing up to like 1500 psi. And it's a huge brake hit, and you really want the thing to shut down on the initial hit. I definitely was hitting it pretty hard initially and trying to be pretty efficient and use the brakes pretty hard on this thing, and it did accept it. And maybe we were doing like a 30-minute race, maybe at the last couple laps I noticed some temperature buildup, like the brakes were getting hot, but I never really lost the brakes. So we spent a lot of time really fine-tuning the brakes themselves. We have a brake doctor, we got everything very round and fitting well, and we run a good brake fluid, so I never really experienced any issues with it. I think it's the car's light enough too, I guess, but yeah, it's pretty efficient for what it is. I was kind of afraid. Similar to driving the car, a lot of people told me, it's going to be a handful. It kind of feels like a Formula Ford in the wet with the skinny tires, and I was pretty afraid to experience what that would be in the wet. But again, it's so confidence-inspiring.
About the gear function and transmission, crash gears.
Yeah, that's another thing. The crash gearbox, everybody says that they double clutch it. I never really did. I just put the clutch in and pull the next gear, and it seems to be pretty straightforward. It does like to be rev matched on downshifts, and it's left-handed. I'm doing it with my left hand, but apart from that, it's insanely brilliant to drive. It feels like a very powerful Miata, if you will, or something like that. It's really easy, and it's just a right-hand drive car. It's got plenty of power, huge amount of torque, but really straightforward and comfortable to drive. It talks to you so well.
You guys mind sharing the stats, like the horsepower and the torque? And
sure. We dynoed the
weight,
car at
maybe?
so the motor went together 3 times before we raced it. We put it together, took it apart.
You know a pretty good engine builder, so.
Yeah. Well, and I was trying to help. I know this pretty intimately now. I know how this kind of goes together and comes apart. And we did the same thing with Peck's motor that you guys saw. I mean, that kind of had to come. This thing doesn't have a head gasket. So the Lampredi motors, the liners screw into the head, and the head fits onto the crankcase, and the only thing sealing it is a couple O-rings. And, you know, the age of the thing being what it is, getting that to seat and seal well can be kind of difficult at times.
Is there truth to the problem with the, I always forget there was, trouble with the different metals?
Yeah, so just similar metal, yeah. There's definitely some erosion. We torque the things in there at about 800 foot-pounds. So to make the liner not distort as you're torquing it to that level is definitely a challenge. So we kind of try to get those in, then do the bore, and then do the valve job. And you have to come up with some pretty trick tooling.
We made fixtures to hold the cylinder head or cylinder block, whatever, whether the 4-cylinder or the 6-cylinder motor in a Bridgeport. And then that's how we hold the cylinder head in order to get this liner tight enough. And then once it's tight, we now have the ability to get the stone of the boring all the way home to the combustion chamber. And so we can get I mean, again, it's taken years to get the process down, but I think we kind of have it down now. So.
Well, you've done probably a number of the 12s, right?
No.
12s, I
Yeah,
assume.
yeah.
So you use the same stuff? And
Same technique.
Yeah.
See, the Lampredi built big block V12s.
Yeah.
And they have the screwed-in liners and the O-rings to control water not getting into the oil.
That's water. That's right. So the O-rings of the perimeter of the liner, cylinder liner, keeps water, engine coolant that keeps the cylinder liners cool keeps the water from going into the sump. And as Tazio said, we actually had a problem with that with the first go-around. And we actually ran it on the dyno, and it started to make good power and all that, but we realized we had engine coolant in the sump, which is obviously not a design feature. So, you know, it had to come back. And look, this isn't an exact science. You know, to his point, you know, these motors are prototypes, and they built 30 of these, and, you know, 60 years ago. And, you know, the castings, although the Italians are as good at that as there is, you know, it's kind of put it together and take it apart, put it together, put it together, until you finally get to where you want to be. One of the questions that gets asked about these cars and this motor, we intend to run this car next year, hopefully at Elkhart Lake and maybe Watkins Glen, maybe up in Seattle. There's a couple of races we'd like to run the car, but these were not known to be long-lived. These motors were not known to be long-lived, but this motor was put together as lovingly as could be put together. And so he's pretty talented and kind to the machinery. So I'm real interested to see now what the service life of this motor is going to be.
It's 5 main variant, I assume?
5 main variant. So, you know, we'll see. I mean, we're going to run it. We're going to run it this weekend at Thunder Hill. And that's probably going to be it for the year, but in the spring, we're going to run the car again. And we're just going to see. So many of these cars, by 1957, 58, 59, when the motors kind of got long in the tooth, nobody in this country was repairing or rebuilding these motors. So the basic car was so good, people put 283 Chevrolets in them and went racing again. And so now the cars are historic and people want to have the motors the way they were. So we want to go down the path of seeing how long this is going to live. We're going to see. We're going to run it. This is not just a play pretty. We're going to run the car on the track.
What would you expect to go first when you say you're going to run it and see?
I don't know. We're going to see. I mean, I don't know how it's going to fail. I mean, sooner or later these motors do fail, and in the day they failed in a variety of ways. I've seen pictures of these with piston rods sticking through the crank side of the crankcase.
Do you have new old stock Vanderbilt bearings or somebody makes them
We
for you?
bought bearings for this from a company, Hall & Hall in the UK, who's making bearings now for them. We were gifted new valves from a friend of mine from a stash of spares from Tony Paravano. So this actually has brand new 1955 period correct valves from factory valves. The original parts were always better than what you can remake. Anything that you have manufactured is just not as good as it was in the day. But, you know, so, and I can tell you that we are surrounded by amazing machine shop talent. And I think exercises like this require that kind of expertise.
Okay, compression ratio, horsepower, torque.
The horsepower was about 255 horsepower at about 6,000 RPM. That's what the factory red line was.
The torque was higher than the horsepower.
Yes,
Yeah.
but
Torquey machine.
interestingly, the 2-liter version of this motor, they spun to 7,000 RPM. They reduced the engine speed to 6,000 RPM on this because there was so much mass. The pistons in this are 4.5 inches across. They're 105 millimeters or something.
It's still over square. So
Another interesting thing about this is there's no timing chain or timing belt. It's all gear driven. So there's gears on the whole entire timing case all the way to the crank to the cams. So the cams are gear driven, everything's gear driven. Getting the right amount of lash and all that in there is also a challenge and tricky.
You won't find too many 751s that did well, other than sprint races, 100 miles, SCCA races, which is one, a lot of races, 100 miles. But we've got to remember, it started out Sebring at 12 hours and came within 12 or 20 seconds of winning the damn thing, 12-hour endurance rate. It was the best finish of any of the 750s in endurance racing.
That's right.
Do you have a rev limiter on it, or how do you keep it under 6?
So like there's a red block right at $6 grand right there.
Yeah.
When I see the needle get close to that, I just shift.
Competitive competition sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It seems to be pretty easy to like glance down there and stay on top of it. It's not like it's very torquey, but it's not very fast revving. I mean, it's fast, but it's not like wham, right? So like you can watch it and click it, and you kind of anticipate it a little bit.
But at the time, you know, at Pebble Beach, there's no V12 that could have beaten this car, regardless of the place. This is a short circuit car.
It is.
A beautiful handling car, a short, tight circuit, 2.1 miles to the lap. It's a perfect car for Pebble Beach. Golden Gate Park had never ran there. The Golden Gate Park ended in '54. But a great automobile. They're looking at a state-of-the-art 4-cylinder car that began with Lampredi 4s, a Grand Prix, and into the sports cars. And this is a great automobile. I raced a 500 TR for a brief period of time, 56 TR before the TRC. Also a Lampredi 4 torquey machine, very torquey.
What did the car look like when you bought it? What was the condition?
It was like this, but it was tired. I mean, the car had been sitting since March of '58, and been sitting for 60 years. They brought it out to Laguna in '97. There was a Carroll Shelby tribute, and they kind of dusted it off, and I think gave it a shitty, quick, cheap paint job, and brought it to California, and it was in the display there for the Carroll Shelby thing. And then there was a Phil Hill tribute at Pebble in '05 maybe, and they brought it back again for the Phil Hill tribute. But it really didn't run. And
The car did not run. They pushed it onto the field
Right.
because we were going to bring it up to the honor of Shelby and Hill, but they couldn't drive up the ramp. They had to push it up.
So it really was required to take the thing completely apart. I mean, he's been 130 miles an hour in this car, and you want the car safe, or as safe as it can be. So it had to come completely apart and be looked at. And We magged all the front suspension and steering components and all that, and they're all good. And this car never had any kind of racing accident, so the chassis is straight as they built it. It was a wonderful example to restore from the standpoint of restoration, because in March of '58, they just put it away and didn't touch it, and 60 years ago.
We met with Jim Hall in Midland, Texas a year or so ago. We were able to ask him a whole bunch of questions. We met with him at his offices at Chaparral, so right in front of the Rattlesnake Raceway. And I asked him a handful of questions about, where did you keep this car? I mean, it's obviously here in Midland, but, did you have it in the actual workshop where the Indy cars were being built and all that, or what was going on with it? And he said that they had kept it for many years, for about 40 years, in a storage lockup in downtown in Midland, which is not a very fantastic town. And there was a whole bunch of boxes all over it, and he went into the storage lockup one day and said, well, we should at least dust it off and bring it into our workshop. So I think around when it came out to the tribute, they kind of dusted it off and gave it that paint job and kind of loved it a little bit and brought it to that. And then I think it kind of went back to the storage facility until I think he decided to kind of part with it and stick to the Chaparral stuff.
I was approached by a Ferrari trying to take Pebble wanted to critique the car, and he's sort of a historian, a know-it-all. That's why I quit judging, realized I don't know it all. That's humility. Every car is a new challenge. Anyway, this guy asked, I said, Pat Otis knows more about this car than anybody else living or not living. Pat Otis knows it. He flew down to Midland, Texas to interview Jim Hall. That's the length that he went to get the history of this car straight. He's done a great job with it.
So in the corners of the suspension, did you update the metallurgy at all?
No.
In terms of
No.
We had the stuff
corners
plated.
or stock?
But what we did is we rebushed and lovingly serviced all of the pivot points, all of anything that had mechanical motion was looked at, loved, adjusted, bushed, prepared. I mean,
There's Hyundai shocks on this. We have those rebuilt, obviously, but they're the same Hyundai shocks. There's a guy in New Hampshire that has a Hyundai shock dyno. So we can actually run the shocks on a dyno and kind of valve them a little bit stiffer. But in terms of actually updating anything, it's all how it would have ran every day. The same leaf springs in the rear. So it's all same spring rate in the front, same stuff.
So you're a young man. Your knowledge is spectacular. Not a lot of guys can appreciate all the whole, everything that goes into this car and everything else. Your passion today, do you like new cars? You gonna stay with the old cars? Because it's wonderful what's inside your head, what you've done with this car and everything else, and it's great to see it being passed down, which we don't get to see a lot of.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's probably a longer answer than you really need or anybody needs. I like all of it. I really like the modern racing. I grew up in the workshop where we do stuff like this, and I've always been really enamored by both the Formula One and endurance stuff. I really love the challenge of trying to bring something like this and go do a 12-hour race on a bumpy airport track and seeing if it lasts. So, I've always been really in love with that. I love the history that got us here, and that's why I really love going to the shop and working on these things. I like seeing if we can push the modern stuff to do even better. So, I like both of them, really.
I tell you, I think we're getting close to 9 o'clock.
Thank you so
And
much.
I wanna thank
Thank you.
Pat.
Very, very good.